The First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, visited flood-hit Brechin today to speak to residents and assess the massive damage unleashed by Storm Babet. Many people there were forced out of their homes at the weekend after the Angus town's flood protection scheme was overwhelmed.
I'm afraid it's going to be a long journey to recovery given the devastation and the scale of the impact. We're working hand in glove with the local council and other partners to make sure that we can help with that recovery. The flood protection defences that we've got, we'll continue to invest in those. So we'll invest £150 million over the course of the Parliament. That's on top of £42 million we'll put in annually to help local authorities with flooding defences where we can.
The rain that hammered parts of eastern Scotland is now away, but it has left a trail of devastation which could take months or years to resolve. Thoughts are now turning to how Brechin and other potentially vulnerable communities can best protect themselves from extreme weather. We spoke with Jill Scott, who is an independent councillor for the Brechin and Edzell ward of Angus Council, and Professor Larissa Naylor from Glasgow University's School of Geographical and Earth Sciences. Jill, give us a sense of what the impact of the floods have been in the local community.
Just absolutely horrific. I mean, people's houses are just decimated. And I think the last couple of days have been really hard because people have been starting to be able to go back into their homes, and, you know, that's really, really upsetting, obviously, seeing it.
And what sort of things are we seeing? I mean, we've seen some pictures in the news reports, obviously, of mud and water around the houses. But people have lost a lot of their property and their lives been destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for those in flats, the ground floor flats, they've lost everything. I think, for those that are in properties went upstairs, they're feeling incredibly lucky that they've still got some belongings. But yeah, it's just really hard. It's harrowing.
And is there enough accommodation for the people who have been put out of their homes?
Yeah, so I got an update earlier. So we've got roughly about 30 people in hotel accommodation. We've also probably got another 30 that are staying with family and friends. And obviously, that'll change. There's obviously a lot of council tenants that the council haven't been able to get hold of, because they might just be staying with friends. And that's obviously having an impact on council officers because they're having to try and find them because they obviously want to check on their welfare.
And Larissa, moving on to the broader picture of Storm Babet, and could this have been predicted? Should we be just expecting this more often now?
So with climate change, we're going to expect an increase in rainfall, an increase in flood events. It's one of the greatest risks to Scotland. And so it's something that we're going to have to increasingly learn to live with. And one of the things we were talking about, it's happened, the flood defences were built and it's happened within 7 years. A 1 in 200 event is a 0.5% chance of happening in any given year. It's not 1 in 200. And that's one of the things. So as our climate changes, as our weather systems change globally, so places become drier and hotter and have wildfires, or we become wetter and have more intense rain more often, then that frequency of event will increase with time.
So is it a case of, rather than trying to prevent it, as you spoke about the flood barriers that were supposed to stop this happening again, is it a case of learning to live with it? And if it is, what does that mean?
Yes, that's a really challenging picture. I mean, flooding has changed over the years, from flood defence to flood protection to flood alleviation. We're learning to manage flood risks. We may never eliminate flood risks entirely in every location, as we've seen in this event. And so that's quite challenging moving forwards. How do we convey that message, and how do we manage the landscape so that we're minimising those risks? Because we've built communities, so Brechin is flooded since the 1770s. So there has been a history of flooding, but is that frequency going to increase? And is the intensity of the rainfall going to trigger more events?
And what does it mean to live with that then? Is it a case of defence? Is it a case of people maybe moving out of their homes and homes being built further away from the water? What does it mean?
Yes, we can manage risk in a number of ways. There's the immediate risk, there's the awful situation those people are living in, and how there's good warning systems, there was very little loss of life. Those systems are in place to support during an event. And I think stepping back from the event and saying, how do we plan and manage for a change in the amount of rain and the frequency of that rain, so that already the landscape was wet before you had the heavy rain. And so I think with managing flooding in somewhere like Scotland, we have to look at the whole of the catchment. So when I was, the extra heavy rain was coming in the upland areas, 70 to 100 millimetres in the upland areas. So we have to think about managing the water across the whole landscape. So it's a kind of a whole geography challenge. And if we can start to slow down the water that's coming down the hill slopes, then will that make the flood infrastructure that's in places to help alleviate that risk? Will that perform better if the water's been able to be stored throughout, say, the whole catchment, as well as at an individual property level? You may be able to manage things. Very difficult for the people who only have a ground floor flat. And those sorts of, that needs to be looked into. But there's new planning policy in Scotland from 2023 that is making it, taking some of those factors into greater consideration than before, because as our climate's changing much faster than we anticipated to some degree, we need to then change all of those systems so that we're all starting to think about ways in which we contribute to flood risk individually, as well as how we respond to flood risk.
And Jill, could the council have done any more? Was it kind of taken by surprise?
I mean, no, we had the red weather warning. We knew it was coming. They were doing what they could. But the fact that the wall's built to take about 12 feet and it was projected to be 16.4 feet, and a lot of people didn't leave their home because last November we were told it could top the wall and it didn't. And I think since the flood wall's gone in, because it has saved a lot of floods, it has stopped that happening and years gone by, but I think they felt secure that they would be safe, and obviously they weren't this time, and nobody could have predicted how far that water would have gone. So yeah, there was many people that chose not to evacuate.
Some people have been out of their homes, as you've said, and there's been talk of them not getting back home before Christmas. Can you give them any assurances on that? No,
I mean, the road itself is having to be surveyed to see how safe that is. And then, we don't actually know the scale of the damage to the properties. And that'll have to be, again, the full extent of it will become clearer in the coming days. So, yeah, it's just really difficult. Nobody could put a time scale on it right now.
And briefly and finally, Larissa, this is the world in which we're living now. We just have to accept that.
We're living with a changing climate. The intensity with which the climate changes partly depends on every single person in terms of we need to decarbonise. We need to, the sooner we reach net zero, the sooner we will, the lesser the impact will be from extreme weather events.
Larissa, Jill, thank you both for joining us in Scotland tonight.